All right, then for this next thing, please lock your live paint layer 2 and create a new layer. And we're going to call this custom patterns. Patterns like that. And I would suggest you copy that text because you're going to use it for the artboard. So then you have, oops, custom patterns like that. Now, get your artboard tool, which is Shift O, and you're gonna grab the current artboard and you're gonna just option drag it so that you make a copy without dragging any of the art. You can put it anywhere you want. I'm gonna put mine down here. Okay, artboard. The name of the artboard instead of Live Paint 2 copy is going to be custom patterns like that. So here are some examples of custom patterns. This is a pattern. You can see this squares and circles, right? Repeat itself over and over and over. And I made this pattern for this candle shade, and it's kind of like a emulation of a Moroccan candle shade. Different angle to it. This is without the actual candle on the inside. So you can see this is made of paper on the inside and then a wood frame on the outside, and it just repeats itself 4 times like that. Here's another one that I made, same kind of idea but using lots of squares. Believe it or not, squares and rectangles. This is all the squares and rectangles, and it just happens to create these shapes also. So how do you make custom patterns like this? And there are many kinds of Moroccan patterns. So these are called Moroccan patterns. And if you just look at it, they're basic shapes put together and then repeated over and over and over and over. Here's another set. This one is obviously just a bunch of circles. And this one here is, you can think of it as a plus sign, but you can also think of it as a this shape here. 2 squares, one inside the other. Okay. And this one here, you can think of it as basically a rectangle and an oval. And the rectangle just happens to have a little pointy thing on it. Okay. Sine waves. These are basically something similar to a sine wave, not quite. Rectangles and squares. More variations. Combinations of ovals here. And then here you have this kind of thing. So let's start by making something like this. Okay. All right. So on your artboard, what you need to do is just get your rectangle tool. Make sure you're on custom pattern and all the other layers are locked. And you're just going to make a square. A simple square like this. Hold on your shift key and drag it out. And then fill it with a solid color. In my case, I want to make mine black. You can make it a solid color of your choice. It doesn't really matter. All right, so now we're going to then take that and we're going to copy it and paste it. But if we actually want it right on top of each other, so I'm going to undo that, and to paste it right on top of each other, it's Command Shift V. How do you know you have 2? Well, if you look at this, you'll see you have 2 rectangles here in your layers panel, so you should have 2. That top one there, I'm going to select that top one, and I'm going to make sure that my transformation point is directly in the center, and I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees. 45, enter. So there you go. So you now have 45 right on top of the other. So obviously these are 2 objects, 2 rectangles, actually squares, and what we need to do is make this a single object. So we're going to take that, select both of them, and we're going to go to our pathfinder over here and unite. So now it's a single path. You can see it's a single object. Then we're going to take that layer again. We're going to select it, and then we're going to copy it and paste it in place. Command Shift V. Now again, there's two of them. You should see two of them. So I'm going to lock the bottom one, select the top one there, and I'm going to give it a no fill, and I'm going to give it a stroke of a different color for now, so make it really easy to see, red, and I'm going to make it bigger. And you can see that the stroke is both on the top and the bottom, or both sides of the path, and that's not what I want. I want the stroke on the outside of the path. So I'm going to go to my stroke panel here, make sure I see the show options, and I'm going to see all of these. And then right here, align stroke is to the outside. So now it's on the outside. And then I want to make it somewhat a little bit away from the black, the pink away from the black. So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to go to my properties panel, make sure this chain is on, it's dark. And I'm going to take this guy, click there, and just hit my up arrow a little bit. So now I'm just moving it away as much as I want to. And then I'm going to change the stroke to black to match. Or you don't have to, it's whatever color you want. So that's an easy way to make this object, right? All right. So now what we want to do is make this into a pattern. We want to be able to make this into a pattern so that we don't have to work so hard to make something like this. All right, we can just make Illustrator do it for us. And so we're going to select the object with our selection tool, V, and we're going to go to Object, Pattern, Make. All right, so the new pattern has been added to the swatches panel. You can see here that there's a bit of a problem. What happened to the one on the inside? So I'm going to cancel that. So right up here, I'm going to hit cancel. The problem was that I had my bottom layer locked, so I didn't actually select it. So I have to make sure those are both unlocked. Select both. Okay, now I see both are selected. Now I'm going to go to Object, Pattern, Make. All right, you get this little thing that says, yeah. Basically saying this window is now popping up. Just hit OK. All right, so you now get a pattern thing, and I'm going to just talk about what this thing does for you. So you can give it a pattern name. I don't know. How about star black with stroke? Whatever you want to call it. Title type. So you can see it's a grid, left and right. Another option would be brick by row. So brick meaning half. You know how bricks are done. The top, the thing above is always placed halfway on the other one. So this point is halfway here and this point is halfway there. That's called brick by row. And the brick offset you can see here is, well, by default it's half, but you can do a third, a fourth, whatever makes sense to you. Okay, and there's actually more to it later on. So I'm just going to put half for now, and then you can choose brick by column. You can see how that changes that. You can do a hex by column and a hex by row. So whatever floats your boat, right? So I'm going to keep it at hex by row, and that takes away the brick offset because we're no longer using bricks. And the width and height. So this thing here. So check it out. If I put my cursor there and then I just press my up arrow, you can see that the width is changing. The space between the objects horizontally is changing. So I am looking at these points right here. So I'm going to type a Z, and well, I can't type a Z. So I'm looking at these points and making them line up as best I can visually. Something like, almost there. Something like that. And then the height means how are these things spaced out vertically. So I'm going to do the same thing by making them line up vertically too. I'm just pressing down my up and down arrows until I see what I want to see. So I'm looking at this point here and this point here, making sure they kind of basically touch. So I'm just toggling back and forth, messing around until I'm happy with the pattern. Okay, something like that. Now you can have a number of copies as 1 by 1, which doesn't make any sense, a 3 by 3, and so on. So you pick. It's okay to make it big so that you can fill in stuff. So a 9 by 9 makes sense. Okay. Now I'm going to close that by hitting done right up here. Done. Now you don't see anything because it is now part of your swatches panel. So if you go to swatches, it's right there. So the way you work it is like any other fill. I'm going to take my rectangle tool and just draw a rectangle. And I'm going to fill it with that guy. All right. So how do we modify it to fit the shape better or make the pattern fit this better? I'm going to press Z and zoom in here to my rectangle that I drew. Okay, so suppose I want to fill this rectangle that I drew, this rectangle. I want to fill it better with the pattern on the inside. So how do I change the pattern on the inside without changing the rectangle? And then we'll do the opposite after that. So the way you do that is you get your selection tool and you right click on your rectangle area here, your fill, and you go to transform. And in this case, you want to choose transform scale. Okay, so transform scale, this should be 100, so I'm going to make that 100. All right, so it looks like that, right? What we want to do is you have the option here to transform the object. The object is a rectangle, and transform the pattern. So what I want to do is take this off, and I want to transform the pattern, but not the rectangle. And I want to transform it uniformly. So I'm going to turn on this uniform and just put my cursor in there. And I want the pattern to be smaller, so I'm just going to put my cursor there and hit my down arrow. And now my pattern will shape itself, and I can put however many things I want in there. So I'm losing the whiteness of the stroke between there. So I don't want it too small. Okay. So something like this. Okay. Now, if I transform the object and not the pattern, well, actually, you know what? Let's keep it transform pattern only, because you can see that that's problematic, right? So once I do transform object, suddenly the object takes on these parameters, which is not what we want. All right. So how do we deal with that? So how do I make my object fit the pattern better? This time, right click on your rectangle and choose transform. You don't see that little menu there, so I'm going to raise this up. Right click and choose transform each, this one here. Okay, so transform each. Okay, so check this out. We have many more options. So what we want to do is transform the object, but not the pattern. So I want to keep the pattern this size. So I'm going to turn that off. And you can see here that there's this transformation grid here. So I'm going to transform relative to the top left corner. So I'm clicking on that top left corner, making it white. So all of these things will be changing stuff relative to the top left corner. All right, so what do I want to do? Well, let's check this out. Let's move this horizontal. You can see here that if I move the horizontal, it makes the edge of my object bigger. So I'm going to put back that down to 100%. Vertical, you can see here it makes the object bigger. Move is to move it, but not move it, but not the pattern. So the pattern inside remains exactly where it is, but I'm moving the object. And this is kind of what I want. So I'm looking at this top left corner, and what do I want to see here? Well, I don't want that because I don't want this partial object. So I want this guy to be pretty much right on this edge. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move this until I'm happy with the left edge. So that looks pretty decent, right? Okay. And then now I'm going to scale it. I'm going to horizontally scale it so this side looks good also. So now I'm going to take this thing and do this kind of thing and go, all right, so what looks good now? So I want this edge to be right about, I don't know, here. So I'm going to put my cursor there and go down. So I'm just using my arrow keys. So that looks pretty decent, something like that. Doesn't look terrible, although I could do this. Actually, no, that probably looks better. Or maybe that. So I get this little triangle here and a little triangle there. So I want to do the same thing with the bottom. I have a little triangle at the top, and I want only a little triangle here. So, all right. So that means I'm going to change the vertical. So I'm going to change this thing and make it smaller, like that. So now my object, I'm changing my object, but the pattern remains the same. All right, that's what's key here. And the transformation point, pick one that makes sense to you. But I like to use the top left because it's easier to deal with. So you know everything's changing relative to the top left corner. All right, so that's how you can change the object, but not the pattern. So how do you change the actual pattern? Let's say I wanted this pattern inside. I want to change the color. So how do you do that? It's pretty simple. You have your pattern right here, this guy. So just double click on the swatch of your pattern, and it brings you back to this, inside that object, and back to your pattern options. So here it is. And I can select certain things. So now I'm going to select this edge. If I go to my layers here, right? So the compound path, what is that? That's the outer thing. So I'm going to select that and maybe change its color to something else, whatever makes sense to you. Then I'm going to select maybe the inside guy and change its fill to something else, like maybe this guy, and then change it to be radial. Okay. And I can change the colors if I want to. I don't want the black stroke on the outside, so I'm going to remove that black stroke. There you go. So then if I'm happy with that, whatever changes I want to do to those objects, I'm going to hit done. There it is, done. Now the pattern inside has been changed because I changed the swatch itself. So that's how you can modify the actual pattern itself.